the real world was displaying behavior of a model that I built in 1992. And when I saw that, I think, okay, well, that's, if the real world's doing what my model does, the end result of my model was a crisis. And that has to be what we're coming into. Mainstream economics said there was going to be, they were telling politicians, and I'm sure there are hopefully some in the audience would remember this experience, what a great year 2008 was going to be. Go out and take credit for your good economic management. And then, of course, any politician who did that found themselves being torn to shreds by journalists saying, you told us it was going to be a great year and it's a crisis. What the hell did you get wrong? And some of them went and bashed up the economists that told them that bad advice. But economics as a whole has basically forgotten about it like they forgot about the Great Depression. So you really need to start from a new foundation, which is incontrovertible. And this was a major idea of the development of what they call the micro foundations approach to macroeconomics. They thought if we all agree on micro, we can therefore derive macro from micro. Now, that was wrong in two ways. First of all, the micro is wrong. And secondly, you cannot derive a high level of analysis from a lower level. If you could, a sensible exam question in a biology exam would be, please take these chemicals and create life. Okay. Now, of course, that's absurd. So you don't try to create biology from organic chemistry. Biology is its own discipline. You have to learn the principles of that. The same thing applies here. Macro is not derivable from micro, even if the micro is correct. So you have to start at the macro level. And then when you do that, you get what are called emergent properties. Now, I'll finish by mentioning one that I found in my very first model, because I took a cyclical model done by a man called Richard Goodwin of an economy with just basically two social classes, workers and capitalists, workers demanding wage rises with a high level of employment, and that gave you a cyclical system where the cycles continued indefinitely. It lacked a financial sector, so I added a financial sector to the model. And what I expected to see was something predicting a future crisis. But what it also predicted was that the cycles in the economy prior to the crisis would diminish. So if you're looking just for economic stability, you'd see the growth rate is fluctuating less, converging to what looks like an equilibrium growth rate, wage shares settling down, employment, et cetera, and then suddenly it started to get bigger cycles, and finally it had a collapse. Now that, in technical terms, ended up being a particular manifestation of what's known as Lorentz equations, which describe the motion of a fluid under a temperature gradient. And there's a particular solution to that called the, again, I'm suddenly forgetting, Pommeau-Maneville. It's called the inverse tangent route to chaos. What would happen with the fluids is the flow would go from being turbulent towards laminar, smooth, so fluctuating towards smooth, and then suddenly start fluctuating on the other side. And so that's what I found. The economy has that characteristic. And once you do that, what it tells you is you cannot ignore the level of private debt. That's what caused that transition. And in a model, even though this is what's called an emergent property, I simply had workers receiving wages and spending them, doing nothing active in the economy. All the borrowing was being done by firms, and firms would borrow money if their rate of profit was higher than their target rate. They would borrow money for extra investment. It was lower, they'd pay it off. So I expected the dynamics of the model to affect the profit share. In fact, the rising level of private debt caused a falling level of wages share of GDP. Now, when we take a look at the data, that's actually what happened as well. So this is an emergent property. I did not build that into the model. I was surprised when it happened. The conclusion of the first paper I wrote was actually focused on that particular phenomenon. So complex systems behave in ways that seem counterintuitive. You have to dive in and say, why is it that if the firms are doing the borrowing, then a rising level of debt causes the workers to lose income share, not the capitalists? That strange sort of thing. So complex systems can be surprising, but because the world actually is a complex system, it'll give you results that are far closer to reality than you get out of the equilibrium elements of mainstream economics. So we desperately need an economics which breaks away from the fetish, I would now call it, for equilibrium.